The afternoon sun was sinking behind the rooftops when I pulled into my driveway in Portland, Maine. The air was cool and golden. The kind of crisp, October light that makes the world look softer than it really is. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. In the passenger seat sat a thick brown envelope, the kind of official one that carries weight far beyond its paper. Inside were documents from the law office of Andrew Harrison, confirming something that still felt unreal to me. My brother Arthur had left me everything he owned. 3 rental apartments downtown and a beach house in Bar Harbor. Mine. All mine. I kept repeating that, trying to make it sound true. Arthur had always been the practical one, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and checked on me after storms. When his heart finally gave out that summer, I thought he'd left me only memories and the small ache of being the last one alive from our family. But he'd left more than that. He'd left a lifeline. A chance to breathe again after years of pinching pennies and worrying about being a burden to my daughter. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the faint hum of traffic. I could already picture Laura's face when I told her. Her surprise. Maybe tears. Maybe laughter. My sweet girl. Always so focused. So in control. She'd worked hard all her life. And lately things hadn't been easy for her or Eric. I imagined how relieved she'd be when she learned her mother was finally secure. Maybe, for once, I could be the one helping her. The key rattled slightly in the lock as I opened the front door. The house smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. I could hear voices coming from the living room. Laura's voice. Clear and firm. She must have stopped by after work. Perfect. I thought. I wouldn't even have to call her. We could sit down, pour coffee, and share the kind of news that makes life turn bright again. Then I heard my name. Something in her tone made me freeze. It wasn't the warm voice she used with me. Not the soft, daughterly tone I'd known for decades. It was sharp, businesslike. The voice she used when talking to clients. My hand rested on the doorknob, but I didn't turn it. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe that strange sense women develop after years of hearing what isn't said. Her words came fast and crisp. Eric, she said. She still trusts me completely. If we play it right, she'll sign the papers by next week. Once that's done, we can put the house on the market. My heart pounded so loudly I thought she might hear it. Eric's voice came through the phone. Distant, but clear. Are you sure it's safe to do that? What if she asks questions? Laura let out a quiet laugh. The kind that chilled me. She never reads anything I give her. I'll tell her it's for insurance or some medical update. She signs everything. For a moment, the world tilted. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady myself. She kept talking. Her tone, quick, efficient. Once we sell the house, we can use the money to pay the debts and invest in the new project. She'll be fine. We'll find a nice, assisted living place. Good care. Weekend visits. It'll sound responsible. Assisted living. She said it like it was a favor. Like it was love. I felt my throat close. They were talking about me, as if I wasn't alive. As if I were already gone. Reduced to property and monthly costs. Eric's voice again. I don't know. Laura. She's your mother. Maybe we can wait a bit. Laura's reply came cold as ice. Wait for what? Until we lose everything. She's had her life. Eric. She had Dad. She had her years. It's our turn now. Our turn. The words cut straight through me. My knees almost gave out. For a long moment I stood there, hearing nothing but the blood rushing in my ears. The envelope with Arthur's documents pressed against my side like a secret too heavy to hold. I wanted to walk away. To leave and never come back. But something inside me refused. I straightened, forced my shaking hands to steady, and turned the doorknob loud enough to make noise. The voices stopped. I stepped into the living room, forcing a smile that felt carved into my face. Laura sat on the couch, phone still in her hand. She looked up and smiled too brightly. Mom, you're home early. How was your day? Just fine, I said. Busy. I had some paperwork to take care of. I placed my purse carefully on the chair, keeping the envelope tucked inside where she couldn't see it. How about you two, long day? She nodded. A little too quickly. Eric called. Just checking on something for work. Everything okay? Of course, I said. I'm just tired. She looked at me for a moment, maybe wondering if I'd heard anything. But my face must have betrayed nothing. After all, I'd spent decades teaching children how to keep calm, how to control a classroom with a single quiet look. I could handle one frightened daughter. She stood and hugged me lightly, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar. You know, Mom, we should really talk soon about your future. There are a few things I'd like to help you organize. Nothing urgent. Just practical stuff. I smiled and nodded. All right. Honey, we can talk later. I'm sure it'll all work out. She seemed satisfied with that and began gathering her bag. As she moved around the room, I noticed how easily she touched things that weren't hers. The family photo on the mantel. The little ceramic bird I'd bought on my honeymoon decades ago. Her fingers lingered on them like she was already claiming them. After she left, the silence in the house felt heavier than ever. I sank into the couch and pressed a hand to my chest. My heart hurt. But it wasn't from fear. It was the weight of understanding. The little girl I'd raised, the one I'd loved more than my own breath, was ready to put me away and sell my life piece by piece. I sat there for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock. The envelope lay in my lap, warm from my hands. I traced Arthur's handwriting across the seal, those steady letters that had always made me feel safe. For a fleeting second, I thought I could hear his voice again. Be careful, Maggie. People aren't always who you think they are. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. My brother had known something I didn't. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would open the envelope completely, read whatever he'd left inside, and figure out what to do next. But not tonight. Tonight I needed to sit in this quiet house, surrounded by ghosts and the faint smell of coffee, and accept that the world I thought I knew had just cracked open. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the chill of the coming evening through the half-open window. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. I reached over, closed the window, and whispered into the stillness, barely loud enough to hear myself. All right, Arthur, I'm listening now. I woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in that gray half-light that makes everything look like memory. My coffee maker sputtered in the kitchen, and the smell filled the room, warm and bitter. I stood there in my robe, staring at the steam rising from the cup, wondering when exactly the line between trust and blindness had blurred. Laura had always been strong-willed. Even as a child, she'd argued about everything, convinced she knew better. I used to admire that. It reminded me of her father. But standing there that morning, I realized her confidence had turned into something colder, sharper, something that no longer had space for me. By the time she arrived that afternoon, I'd already decided to pretend nothing had happened. If she thought I was still the gullible, tired woman she could outsmart, then that was exactly what I'd let her believe. She came through the door with her usual brightness, a smile so wide it almost looked rehearsed. Hi, Mom. I brought you that soup you like, from Harbor Street Deli. You've got to eat better. You've been losing weight. I thanked her, forcing a smile as I took the container. She placed her purse on the counter and started straightening things that didn't need straightening. It was something she did when she wanted to control the room. You've been busy lately, I said. How's work at Kingston Realty? She sighed, sitting at the table. It's stressful, Mom. The market's crazy right now. And Eric's project fell through. I could tell she was rehearsing the setup to something bigger. I poured us each a glass of iced tea and waited. Sure enough, she continued. You know, maybe it's time we make things simpler for you. You're alone here. This house is old. Expensive to maintain. Eric and I could help you manage things. You wouldn't have to worry about bills or property taxes. Her tone was soft, caring on the surface. But the rhythm of it was too smooth, too practiced. I stirred my tea slowly, watching the lemon slice spin. That's thoughtful of you, honey. But I'm fine. I've always managed. She smiled again. Too quick. Of course. I just don't want you to feel overwhelmed. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sound of her car faded. I stared at the place where her hand had rested on the table. Nails perfectly manicured. No trace of the little girl who used to draw crayon hearts for me. I reached for the small wooden box on the shelf and opened it. Inside were a few old birthday cards from her, written in a child's looping letters. Love you forever. Mommy. The words blurred as my eyes filled. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the quiet house, touching the furniture, the pictures, the life I'd built. Every corner felt smaller now, every shadow longer. Around midnight, I sat down with a stack of folders Laura had given me months ago, all labeled in her handwriting. Health insurance, power of attorney, financial updates. I began to read each page carefully. Something I'd never done before. Most were harmless, routine papers. But near the bottom, I found one labeled Supplemental Care Agreement. The words blurred for a moment as I realized what it was. It authorized Laura King, my daughter, to make financial and medical decisions on my behalf if deemed necessary. My signature was at the bottom, dated 6 months earlier. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from gasping. She already had a foothold. The next morning, I sat in the kitchen when my phone buzzed. Her name appeared on the screen. Hey, Mom. How are you feeling today? I'm all right, I said. Just tired. She hesitated. Maybe I can come by later. Bring dinner. And we can talk about a few things. Nothing serious. Just some updates. I agreed. My voice sounded calm, almost pleasant. But inside, my thoughts raced. When she arrived that evening, she had a folder under her arm. She talked about her job, about a coworker's new baby, all while avoiding the real reason she was there. Finally, she placed the folder on the table and looked at me. I've been thinking, she said, about your future. You should really consider moving into a community, not a nursing home. Mom. Something nice. Like Brookview Estates. You'd have people around. Activities. Safety. I looked at her carefully. Her face was calm, confident. But her fingers tapped against the folder. I could see the tension under the surface. I took a sip of water, pretending to consider it. Maybe, I said, but not yet. I still like waking up to my own coffee and my own porch. She laughed lightly. Of course. I just worry about you. That's all. When she left, I followed her to the door. She hugged me quickly, then turned toward her car. I watched her go, the taillights fading into the evening mist. After she was gone, I opened the folder she'd left behind. Inside were printouts of senior living communities, brochures, and one typed document with blank spaces for signatures. At the top, it read, Residential Transfer Authorization. I folded it neatly, placed it back in the folder, and put it in the kitchen drawer under the old dish towels. Then I sat down and wrote a note in my small blue journal. She wants control. She thinks I'll hand it to her. She's wrong. I stayed awake again that night, the clock ticking loud enough to mark every second of my new reality. Around Swy. M. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. The moonlight spilled across the lawn, soft and silver. The same light that had once guided Laura home from her teenage curfews. I remembered waiting by this very window, praying she'd come home safe. I had no idea I'd stand here years later, praying for the strength to protect myself from her. By morning, the sleeplessness had turned into a kind of calm. I made coffee, dressed, and opened my purse to check the envelope from Arthur. I hadn't yet broken the seal, but the thought of it gave me courage. He'd always said I was stronger than I thought. The phone rang again. Laura's voice came through, bright and brisk. Morning. Mom, I was thinking, maybe we should go see Dr. Levin next week for a checkup, just to make sure everything's fine. You know, at your age, it's smart to stay ahead. Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. At your age, I told her I'd think about it. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, holding the phone. The words echoed in my head like a warning bell. At your age, assisted living, medical decisions. She was preparing her next move. I looked down at the envelope again, traced my brother's name with my thumb, and finally whispered to the empty room. All right, Arthur. Whatever's in here, I'm ready to see it. The paper felt heavy between my fingers. I slid a knife along the edge and pulled out a letter written in Arthur's neat handwriting. The ink slightly smudged, as if he had written it in a hurry. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, each sentence carving deeper into me. He had known. He had sensed what I refused to see. He wrote about trust, about the danger of letting loneliness turn into blindness. He reminded me that love, even family love, should never be confused with ownership. By the time I folded the letter back into its envelope, my hands were shaking. Arthur had always looked after me, even when I thought I didn't need him. He was still doing it now. The next few days passed in a kind of fog. I went through the motions of daily life. Grocery shopping, reading the newspaper, making dinner for one. But inside my head, I replayed every moment of Laura's life like a movie I was finally watching clearly for the first time. When she was 6, she brought home a crumpled drawing from kindergarten. A house with 3 crooked windows and 2 stick figures holding hands. Me and you. Mommy, she'd said, proud of her work. I'd hung it on the refrigerator for years until the paper yellowed at the edges. When she was 16, we'd fought about curfew. She'd come home late from a party, eyes red, voice sharp. You don't get it. Mom, you don't understand how the world works. I'd grounded her for a week, but I still left her favorite cereal on the counter every morning. I always believed love would be enough. After John died, it was just the 2 of us. I took extra shifts at the elementary school, saved every dollar so she could go to Boston University. She had been so proud when she got in. I remember standing outside her dorm, pretending not to cry while she waved from the window. All those memories used to feel warm. Now they felt like shards of glass, sharp and glittering with regret. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch when my neighbor Tom waved from across the street. He walked over, his dog tugging at the leash. Haven't seen Laura around much lately, he said. Everything, all right. Oh, she's busy, I replied, forcing a smile. Work. You know how it is. He nodded. Yeah. Sure. Well, you let me know if you ever need help with anything around here. You're too nice to live alone. After he left, I realized how many people saw me as fragile now. It was like a new label stuck to my skin without my permission. Widow, retired, elderly, helpless. That evening, Laura called again. Her voice was sweet but strained, the kind of politeness that hides impatience. Mom, I've been talking to Eric. and we really think you should consider letting us handle your finances. Just until you feel less stressed. You've done so much. It's time to relax. I kept my tone light. That's kind of you. Honey, let me think about it. She sighed softly. That little sound she used to make when she didn't get her way as a child. All right. But don't wait too long. Okay, I just want to help. After we hung up, I sat there, staring at the phone. I thought about all the times she'd asked me to sign something. All the papers I'd trusted without reading. How many doors had I already opened for her without realizing it? That night, sleep wouldn't come. I walked into the guest room. The one that used to be hers. Still painted pale yellow. The trophies from her childhood were packed in boxes. The room cold and bare. I opened the closet and found an old photo album. The first picture was of her first day of school. She was smiling, missing a front tooth, holding my hand. I whispered into the dark room, "What happened to us?" "Laura, when did love turn into strategy?" The next morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the small park near the old elementary school where I used to teach. The swings were empty. The playground newly painted. I sat on a bench, listening to the children's laughter, and remembered what it felt like to matter. Back then, people listened when I spoke. My students used to trust me completely. I'd taught them honesty, kindness, responsibility. Yet here I was, a teacher who'd failed her own child. On the way home, I stopped by the grocery store. The clerk, a young man with freckles, smiled at me and said, "Afternoon. Mrs. Evans. Need help carrying your bags today?" "No. Thank you," I said, a bit sharper than I meant. I could feel the pity in his voice, even if he didn't mean it. When I got home, I found an envelope on the porch. Laura's handwriting. Inside was a printed brochure for Brookview Estates. The same assisted living place from the folder. A sticky note was attached. "Mom, just look at it. You'll love the art classes and the view of the gardens. Love. L." I crumpled the note in my hand. Love. L. It felt like a signature on a sales contract. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the dining table as the sun dipped below the trees. The house creaked softly around me. A familiar sound that used to comfort me. Now, it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I unfolded Arthur's letter again. His words seemed to echo louder this time. "If there's ever a day you doubt your instincts, trust mine. Call Andrew Harrison." Andrew Harrison. The name steadied me. Arthur's lawyer. The man who had handled all of his affairs. I still had his card somewhere. Tucked inside my address book. I found it between an old grocery list and a birthday reminder. As I held the card, I thought about calling him right then, but I hesitated. If I made that call, everything would change. I would no longer be the naive mother hoping for the best. I would become the woman preparing for battle against her own child. I looked around the house one more time. The pictures. The couch. The lamp with the chipped base. Every piece of a life built with love and sacrifice. Then I slipped the card into my purse and whispered to myself, "Tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll call." Outside. The wind rattled the windows, and for a moment I thought I heard Arthur's voice again. Calm and certain. Like it used to be. "You're stronger than you think. Maggie." I closed my eyes and let the sound of the wind fill the silence. The decision was made. Even if I hadn't yet said the words out loud, I woke to the sound of rain against the window. Steady and soft. Like the ocean's heartbeat. The house felt colder that morning. Get there too. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the card from Andrew Harrison. The edges were worn. The ink slightly faded. But the name looked solid. Trustworthy. I dialed the number before I could change my mind. He answered on the second ring. Harrison Law Offices. This is Andrew speaking. His voice was deep, calm. Exactly what I needed. I hesitated for a second, unsure where to start. My name is Margaret Evans, I said finally. My brother Arthur worked with you before he passed away. Ah. Mrs. Evans. I remember. Your brother was a good man. How can I help you? I took a breath, staring at the steam rising from my coffee. He left me some properties, I said. And I've received the documents. But I think I need advice. It's a complicated situation with my daughter. I understand, he said. Why don't you come into my office tomorrow morning? We'll go over everything together. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. I wasn't sure what the next step would be. But at least I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, I dressed carefully in slacks and a soft gray sweater. I didn't want to look frail. I wanted to look like a woman who still knew her mind. The law office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind with tall windows and framed diplomas lining the walls. Andrew Harrison was a man in his 50s. Tall, clean-cut, with the kind of steady eyes that made you feel safe just looking at him. He shook my hand firmly. Please, have a seat. Mrs. Evans. Your brother spoke very fondly of you. I smiled faintly. He was the good one in the family. Andrew opened a folder and pulled out a stack of papers. Arthur left detailed instructions. The 3 apartments and the beach house are now legally in your name. The rental income from the apartments has been accumulating since his passing. About $9,000 so far. I blinked. 9,000. He nodded. It's all in a holding account. We can transfer it whenever you're ready. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I'd lived so long on fixed income and modest savings that the thought of having real financial breathing room felt unreal. But then a new kind of fear crept in. My daughter doesn't know about this, I said quietly. Andrew looked up from the papers. And you want to keep it that way. For now, I don't trust her anymore. He studied my face for a long moment before speaking again. Your brother warned me something like this might happen. He asked me to make sure your assets stayed protected. I nodded slowly. He knew me too well. We went over everything. Each property. Each document. Andrew explained that once the final transfers were notarized, no one could touch them without my explicit consent. It was the first time in a long while I felt a sense of control. Before I left, he handed me his card again. If you ever feel pressured to sign anything, call me first. Day or night. I promised I would. When I got back home, the house looked different. It wasn't smaller or darker, but the air felt heavier, like it was waiting for something to happen. I made tea, sat on the couch, and tried to calm the racing thoughts. Then the phone rang. Laura's voice, bright and familiar. Hi, Mom. How was your day? Fine, I said. Just ran a few errands. That's good. Listen, Eric and I were wondering if we could come by tomorrow evening. There's something we'd like to talk about. Just some paperwork for your insurance. My grip on the phone tightened. Of course. Honey, I'll be here. After we hung up, I sat perfectly still. The rain had stopped, but I could still hear the dripping from the eaves. Paperwork. Insurance. She was moving quickly now. Maybe she'd sensed something. That night, I pulled out a small notebook and began writing everything down. Every conversation. Every time she mentioned paperwork or doctors or assisted living, I titled the first page, The Record. If she wanted to build a case against me, I'd have my own. When Laura and Eric arrived the next evening, they brought wine and smiles, the kind of smiles people wear when they're about to sell you something. I poured the wine, trying to keep my hands steady. Eric looked around the living room. Still feels so cozy here, he said. Laura shot him a quick glance. Mom, We just need you to sign a couple of things, she said, placing a manila folder on the table. Nothing big. Just updates from your insurance provider. She slid the papers toward me with a pen. I glanced down and saw fine print. Long sentences that blurred together. I felt a pulse of panic but kept my face calm. I'm a bit tired tonight, I said. Maybe I'll look at it tomorrow when my eyes are fresh. Laura's smile tightened. It's really simple, Mom. Just a few signatures. I shook my head gently. Tomorrow. She exhaled through her nose. That little sound she made when frustrated. All right. Whatever you prefer. After they left, I locked the door and took the papers straight to my bedroom. Under the soft yellow light of my bedside lamp, I began to read, line by line. My stomach twisted as the words took shape. Power of attorney. Transfer of financial management. Medical authorization. They hadn't even tried to hide it. I slept little that night, waking at every sound. At dawn, I packed the folder into my bag and drove straight to Andrew's office. He read through the pages slowly, his expression hardening. Mrs. Evans, he said. These documents would have given your daughter full legal control over your assets and medical care. If you had signed them, she could have sold everything you own. I felt my throat close, so I wasn't imagining it. No, he said quietly. You weren't. What do I do now? He leaned forward. First, do not confront them. Let them think you're still trusting and unaware. Second, I'll expedite your property transfers. Once those are finalized, they can't touch anything, even if they try. I nodded, feeling both terrified and grateful. Before I left, he added one more thing. If you feel unsafe, call me. I mean that. You don't have to face this alone. That night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. My reflection in the glass looked older, harder. I thought of Arthur, of all the warnings I'd ignored. Maybe this was his way of saving me one last time. In the quiet, I whispered to the empty room. All right, Arthur. The game has begun. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of weather that sits on your chest like a weight. I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing a cup, watching a thin line of rain trail down the window. Everything looked the same. But I was not the same woman who had stood there a week ago. I had secrets now. Power. Even the kind my daughter didn't know I had. The phone rang just as I was drying my hands. I hesitated before answering. It was Laura. Her tone was calm but careful. Morning. Mom, did you look over those papers? I told her I had, and that I wanted to think about them a little longer. There was a pause, a small silence where I could almost hear her jaw tighten. Sure, she said. Whatever makes you comfortable. After we hung up, I sat at the table, feeling the tension in my shoulders slowly drain. The pretending was working. She still thought I was harmless. That afternoon, I drove to the post office to send a few things for Andrew to review. While waiting in line, I saw an elderly man arguing with the clerk about a missing package. His voice trembled with frustration. But what struck me was how everyone around him looked through him. Impatient. Dismissive. I realized that's how Laura must see me now. A woman whose time had passed. Whose thoughts didn't matter. Invisible. When I got home, there was a car parked in front of my house. Laura's. My stomach clenched. She was standing in the driveway holding an umbrella, her hair damp from the rain. Mom, she said, smiling too brightly. I was nearby and thought I'd check in. I forced a smile. Of course. Honey, come inside. She followed me in, shaking off her umbrella and setting it by the door. She looked around as if taking inventory, her eyes lingering on my purse. The papers on the counter. You've been busy, she said casually. Just errands. You know, the usual. She sat down and folded her hands. Eric and I are worried. Mom, you've been a bit distracted lately. Forgetting things. It might be a good idea to see a doctor. The way she said it was gentle. But the meaning behind it hit me like a blow. Forgetting things. She was laying groundwork. I smiled faintly. Maybe you're right. I'll schedule something next week. She looked surprised. Almost disappointed that I hadn't resisted. That told me everything I needed to know. After she left, I sat in silence. My heart pounding. She was getting ready to use my own health against me. I picked up my notebook and wrote everything down. Every word. Every detail. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching the house. I drew the curtains and double-checked the locks. Maybe it was paranoia. Or maybe I finally understood how easily control can slip away when you trust the wrong people. The next morning, Andrew called. He told me the property transfers were officially complete. The apartments. The beach house. Everything was now mine. Fully protected. You're safe, he said. No one can touch them. I thanked him, my voice breaking. For the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom. Later that day, I decided to visit my old friend Caroline. We hadn't spoken much since John died. Life had pulled us apart, and maybe Laura had liked it that way. Caroline lived across town in a small blue house with rose bushes out front. When she opened the door and saw me, she gasped. Maggie Evans. Is that really you? She hugged me tight. And for a moment, I felt like myself again. We sat in her kitchen with coffee and pie, and I told her everything. The inheritance, the forged paperwork, the manipulation. I expected disbelief, maybe pity. But she just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You always were too kind for your own good, she said softly. But you're not crazy. Maggie. What they're doing is wrong. We made a plan. I would stay in touch with her every day. If she didn't hear from me, she'd call the police. It felt dramatic, but necessary. When I got home that evening, Laura called again. Her voice was cheerful, almost forced. Mom, I scheduled an appointment for you with Dr. Levin tomorrow morning. He's a specialist. Just routine. Nothing to worry about. I gripped the phone tighter. Tomorrow. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. That sounds fine, I said, keeping my voice steady. What time? 9 o'clock. I'll pick you up around 8:30. Perfect, I said. When I hung up, I stared at the phone in my hand for a long time. She thought she was setting the trap. She had no idea I already saw the net closing. That night, I called Andrew. I told him everything. The doctor, the appointment, the subtle accusations about forgetfulness. He was silent for a moment before replying. Mrs. Evans, do not let her take you anywhere. I'll come to you in the morning. We'll handle this properly. I thanked him and promised I would wait. But after we hung up, I knew I couldn't just sit still. Around midnight, I heard a car slow down outside my house. My heart jumped. But it drove on. Still, I couldn't sleep. I packed a small overnight bag and set it by the door. Just in case. At dawn, the sky was streaked with pink and gold. Deceptively peaceful. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood come to life. Children with backpacks, dogs pulling at their leashes, a mail carrier in a bright blue raincoat. Normal life, the kind I used to have before everything started unraveling. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Laura. Don't forget. I'll be there at 8:30. I typed back a single word. Ready. But I wasn't ready to go where she planned to take me. I was ready to leave for good. At 7:00 sharp. I grabbed my bag, my wallet, and the envelope with all the documents. I walked out the back door, locking it quietly behind me. The morning air was cool and sharp. I walked 2 blocks to the main road and called a taxi. When the driver asked where to listen, I said the only words that came to mind: downtown Portland. Please. As we pulled away, I looked back at my house. The curtains fluttered in the open window of the living room, like a small wave goodbye. I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in months, I felt in control. The car turned the corner, and the house disappeared from view. Whatever trap Laura had prepared for me that morning, she would find it empty. The taxi ride felt endless. The city rolling by like a film I wasn't really watching. Buildings, people, lights. All of it blurred behind the glass as my mind ran faster than the car. I pressed my purse against my lap, feeling the folder inside with all the papers Andrew had prepared. That envelope was my armor now. Without it, I had nothing. When the driver stopped in front of the hotel, I paid him in cash and stepped out into the morning drizzle. The hotel was small. The kind of place where no one asks questions as long as you pay up front. The woman at the front desk looked up from her computer. "Morning, ma'am." "Checking in." "Yes. Just for a few nights." She smiled, sliding a form toward me. "Name and ID." "Please." I hesitated for a moment, then used my full name. If Laura started looking for me, she'd check hospitals first, then maybe the police. A hotel was the last place she'd think to call. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out over the street. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the city's noise drifting through the glass. I'd left my home, my life, everything familiar, but I wasn't afraid. I was done being afraid. Around 10, my phone buzzed. 15 missed calls from Laura, 3 from Eric. I stared at the screen until it went dark again. The guilt tried to creep in, but I pushed it back. Love had turned into a trap. I had to cut the rope before it strangled me. I waited until 11 before calling Andrew. He answered immediately. "Mrs. Evans, are you safe?" "I am," I said. "I'm at the hotel." "Good. Stay there. I'll come to you." He arrived 40 minutes later, his suit slightly damp from the rain. He looked at me with quiet relief. "You did the right thing, leaving that house," he said. "Now we protect what's yours." He set his briefcase on the table and took out several documents. "These finalize the ownership of your brother's properties. Once we file these, no one can interfere. Not even a family member with power of attorney." I signed where he pointed, my hand steady for the first time in weeks. When it was done, he closed the folder and looked up at me. "They'll realize you're gone soon," he said. "They'll call the police. Maybe even claim you're disoriented. But as long as you make a voluntary statement, no one can force you to go back." "A statement?" "Yes. We go to the police station today. You tell them you left on your own, that you're safe and in control. That way, if your daughter tries to file a report, they'll already know the truth." I nodded slowly. "All right. Let's do it." The ride to the station was quiet. My reflection in the car window looked unfamiliar. Older somehow, but stronger too. When we arrived, Andrew introduced me to Officer Evans, a woman with calm eyes and a notepad in her hand. She listened as I explained everything. I told her about the false paperwork, the doctor's appointment that wasn't about my health, the years of subtle manipulation that had led me here. She wrote carefully, asking gentle questions but never doubting me. At the end, she said, "Mrs. Evans, are you declaring that you left your home voluntarily and that you are of sound mind?" "Yes, I am." "And do you wish to have any contact with your daughter or her husband at this time?" "No, not right now." She nodded, slid the report into a file, and smiled faintly. "You're doing the right thing." Many people never get the chance to take back control. When we left the station, I felt like a chain had been lifted off my shoulders. The rain had stopped, and the streets glistened in the sunlight. Andrew turned to me. "You need to rest. Stay at the hotel for now. I'll handle the paperwork and keep an eye on their next move." That night, the phone kept buzzing. I didn't answer. The texts turned from pleading to angry. "Mom. Where are you, Mom? This isn't funny. If you don't answer, we're calling the police." I put the phone face down on the nightstand and turned off the light. The next morning, Andrew called. "They did report you missing," he said. "The police informed them that you'd already made a voluntary statement. They weren't happy about that." "What did Laura say?" He paused. "She insisted you were confused, that someone must be manipulating you." I laughed softly. A tired, bitter laugh. "She still doesn't get it." He hesitated before speaking again. "I've arranged something for you, Mrs. Evans. A safer place." "Safer?" "Your brother's beach house in Bar Harbor. It's ready to live in. Utilities are active, and no one knows about it except us. You'll be out of reach there." Bar Harbor. I hadn't been there in years, but the memory of the ocean came back to me instantly. The salt in the air, the sound of gulls, the way the sky turned pink over the water. "When can I go?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll drive you myself." I packed my bag that evening. Clothes, the notebook with my records, the inheritance documents, and one framed photo of Arthur. Nothing else. The house, the furniture, the memories of Laura's voice echoing down the hall. I left all of it behind. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about the little girl who used to run to me after school. Her hair flying, her arms wide. Somewhere along the way, that child had disappeared. Maybe life had hardened her. Or maybe I'd let her become someone I didn't recognize. At sunrise, I checked out of the hotel. Andrew was waiting in the car out front. As we drove north, the city faded behind us, replaced by open fields and winding roads that smelled faintly of pine. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, almost healing. When we finally reached the coast, the air changed. It tasted clean, sharp, alive. The house stood on a small rise overlooking the water. White siding, blue shutters, a porch that faced the sea. Arthur's touch was everywhere. I stepped out of the car and just stood there for a moment, breathing. The waves crashed gently against the rocks below. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt safe. Andrew carried my bag to the porch. "This is yours now," he said. "No one can take it." Inside, everything was exactly as Arthur had left it. Simple furniture, a bookshelf full of his favorite novels, and a note sitting on the kitchen counter in his handwriting. "If you are reading this, Maggie, then you've made it. This is your place to rest, to start again. Trust yourself. Live freely." I held the note to my chest and closed my eyes. Andrew smiled. "You'll be fine here. I'll check in every few days. Make sure everything's settled." "Thank you," I said, "for everything." He gave a small nod and left, his car disappearing down the long coastal road. I walked to the porch and looked out at the horizon. The sun rising over the Atlantic. The ocean didn't judge or demand. It just existed, strong and endless. I sat down in the wooden chair, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and let the sea wind carry away the last traces of fear. The taxi ride felt endless, the city rolling by like a film I wasn't really watching. Buildings, people, lights, all of it blurred behind the glass as my mind ran faster than the car. I pressed my purse against my lap, feeling the folder inside with all the papers Andrew had prepared. That envelope was my armor now. Without it, I had nothing. When the driver stopped in front of the hotel, I paid him in cash and stepped out into the morning drizzle. The hotel was small. The kind of place where no one asks questions as long as you pay up front. The woman at the front desk looked up from her computer. Morning. Ma'am. Checking in. Yes. Just for a few nights. She smiled, sliding a form toward me. Name and ID. Please. I hesitated for a moment, then used my full name. If Laura started looking for me, she'd check hospitals first, then maybe the police. A hotel was the last place she'd think to call. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out over the street. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the city's noise drifting through the glass. I'd left my home, my life, everything familiar. But I wasn't afraid. I was done being afraid. Around 10. My phone buzzed. 15 missed calls from Laura. 3 from Eric. I stared at the screen until it went dark again. The guilt tried to creep in, but I pushed it back. Love had turned into a trap. I had to cut the rope before it strangled me. I waited until 11 before calling Andrew. He answered immediately. Mrs. Evans. Are you safe? I am. I said. I'm at the hotel. Good. Stay there. I'll come to you. He arrived 40 minutes later. His suit slightly damp from the rain. He looked at me with quiet relief. You did the right thing leaving that house, he said. Now, we protect what's yours. He set his briefcase on the table and took out several documents. These finalize the ownership of your brother's properties. Once we file these, no one can interfere. Not even a family member with power of attorney. I signed where he pointed, my hand steady for the first time in weeks. When it was done, he closed the folder and looked up at me. They'll realize you're gone soon, he said. They'll call the police. Maybe even claim you're disoriented. But as long as you make a voluntary statement, no one can force you to go back. A statement. Yes. We go to the police station today. You tell them you left on your own. That you're safe and in control. That way, if your daughter tries to file a report, they'll already know the truth. I nodded slowly. All right. Let's do it. The ride to the station was quiet. My reflection in the car window looked unfamiliar. Older somehow, but stronger too. When we arrived, Andrew introduced me to Officer Evans, a woman with calm eyes and a notepad in her hand. She listened as I explained everything. I told her about the false paperwork, the doctor's appointment that wasn't about my health, the years of subtle manipulation that had led me here. She wrote carefully, asking gentle questions but never doubting me. At the end, she said, Mrs. Evans, are you declaring that you left your home voluntarily and that you are of sound mind? Yes, I am. And do you wish to have any contact with your daughter or her husband at this time? No, not right now. She nodded, slid the report into a file, and smiled faintly. You're doing the right thing. Many people never get the chance to take back control. When we left the station, I felt like a chain had been lifted off my shoulders. The rain had stopped, and the streets glistened in the sunlight. Andrew turned to me. You need to rest. Stay at the hotel for now. I'll handle the paperwork and keep an eye on their next move. That night, the phone kept buzzing. I didn't answer. The texts turned from pleading to angry. Mom. Where are you, Mom? This isn't funny. If you don't answer, we're calling the police. I put the phone face down on the nightstand and turned off the light. The next morning, Andrew called. They did report you missing, he said. The police informed them that you'd already made a voluntary statement. They weren't happy about that. What did Laura say? He paused. She insisted you were confused, that someone must be manipulating you. I laughed softly. A tired, bitter laugh. She still doesn't get it. He hesitated before speaking again. I've arranged something for you. Mrs. Evans. A safer place. Safer. Your brother's beach house in Bar Harbor. It's ready to live in. Utilities are active. And no one knows about it except us. You'll be out of reach there. Bar Harbor. I hadn't been there in years. But the memory of the ocean came back to me instantly. The salt in the air. The sound of gulls. The way the sky turned pink over the water. When can I go? Tomorrow morning. I'll drive you myself. I packed my bag that evening. Clothes. The notebook with my records. The inheritance documents. And one framed photo of Arthur. Nothing else. The house. The furniture. The memories of Laura's voice echoing down the hall. I left all of it behind. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about the little girl who used to run to me after school. Her hair flying, her arms wide, somewhere along the way. That child had disappeared. Maybe life had hardened her. Or maybe I'd let her become someone I didn't recognize. At sunrise. I checked out of the hotel. Andrew was waiting in the car out front. As we drove north, the city faded behind us, replaced by open fields and winding roads that smelled faintly of pine. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, almost healing. When we finally reached the coast, the air changed. It tasted clean, sharp, alive. The house stood on a small rise overlooking the water. White siding, blue shutters, a porch that faced the sea. Arthur's touch was everywhere. I stepped out of the car and just stood there for a moment, breathing. The waves crashed gently against the rocks below. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt safe. Andrew carried my bag to the porch. "This is yours now," he said. "No one can take it." Inside, everything was exactly as Arthur had left it. Simple furniture, a bookshelf full of his favorite novels, and a note sitting on the kitchen counter in his handwriting. "If you are reading this, Maggie, then you've made it. This is your place to rest. To start again. Trust yourself. Live freely." I held the note to my chest and closed my eyes. Andrew smiled. "You'll be fine here. I'll check in every few days. Make sure everything's settled." "Thank you," I said. "For everything." He gave a small nod and left, his car disappearing down the long coastal road. I walked to the porch and looked out at the horizon. The sun rising over the Atlantic. The ocean didn't judge or demand. It just existed. Strong and endless. I sat down in the wooden chair, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and let the sea wind carry away the last traces of fear. The wind picked up that afternoon, sending a low hum through the windows of the beach house. I sat on the porch, wrapped in Arthur's old flannel blanket, watching the waves break against the rocks below. The air smelled of salt and seaweed. And for the first time in a long time, I could hear my own thoughts clearly. The quiet here was different from the quiet of my old house. This silence wasn't heavy. It was alive. Inside, I unpacked the few things I had brought. A framed picture of John and me from our 25th anniversary. Arthur's note. My notebook of records. And a single plant I had rescued from the kitchen windowsill before I left. I placed the photo on the mantel, the notebook on the table, and the plant near the window where it could catch the morning light. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Later that day, I drove into town for groceries. Bar Harbor had changed since the last time I visited with Arthur years ago. The small shops were still there, though some had new names. I walked through the aisles of the grocery store slowly, letting the normalcy of it wash over me. People greeted me with polite smiles. No one looked at me with suspicion or pity. I was just another woman doing her shopping. At the checkout, the cashier, a young woman with kind eyes, looked at the address on my check. "Oh, the White House on Cliff Road. That place is beautiful." Haven't seen anyone there in years. It was my brother's, I said softly. He passed away. And now I'm moving in. She gave a sympathetic smile. I'm sorry for your loss. You're lucky to have that view, though. It's like the ocean keeps you company. Her words stayed with me as I drove home. The ocean as company. Maybe she was right. That evening, I cooked a simple dinner and sat by the window, watching the sun sink into the horizon. I felt a small peace blooming inside me. Fragile, but real. But peace never lasts long when there are unfinished battles waiting. The phone rang just as I was rinsing my plate. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. But something in my gut told me who it was. I answered. Mom. Laura's voice came through. Tight and anxious. Where are you? We've been worried sick. I took a breath. I'm fine. Laura. You don't need to worry. You disappeared. You didn't answer your phone. You didn't tell anyone where you went. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? There it was. The guilt wrapped in anger. The tone she always used when she wanted to make me feel small. I'm safe. I repeated. That's all that matters. Safe where? With that lawyer? Is he filling your head with lies about us? No one is filling my head. Laura. I made my own decisions. She went silent for a moment. And when she spoke again, her voice was colder. Mom. Listen to me. You're confused. You've been acting strange for months. We just want to help you. But you're making it impossible. I closed my eyes. The same script. The same manipulation. You don't need to help me. I said quietly. I'm fine. She exhaled sharply. Fine. If that's how you want it. But don't expect us to wait forever. The line went dead. I stood there. The phone still in my hand. The sound of the ocean filling the space she'd left behind. The next morning, Andrew called. They found out you're in Bar Harbor. He said. I don't know how. But they've been trying to access your property records. They can't do anything. But they're not giving up. I expected as much. What should I do? Keep a record of every call. Every message. And if they show up, call me immediately. You're under no obligation to speak to them. After we hung up, I spent the day cleaning, cooking, pretending to be normal. But underneath it all, a quiet fear pulsed. I knew Laura. She wouldn't stop just because the law said she couldn't. She'd find another way. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and my notebook in my lap. I started writing everything that had happened since I left. Not for Andrew. Not for the police. But for me. For the woman who needed to remember every detail in case she ever doubted herself again. Around midnight, the sound of tires on gravel broke the stillness. Headlights cut through the darkness outside the window. My heart stopped. A car slowed in front of the house. Paused for a few seconds. Then drove away. I stayed frozen until the sound disappeared completely. My hands were trembling when I finally turned off the porch light and locked the door. The next morning, I called Caroline. I didn't want to worry her. But I needed a familiar voice. Maggie, she said. Relief flooding her tone. I've been thinking about you every day. How are you holding up? I told her about the house. The ocean. The peace. The late-night car. She clicked her tongue. That's them. Maggie. You know it is. Don't you dare go outside alone. I smiled despite the knot in my chest. I'll be careful. I promise. You'd better. And call me every day. Even just for a minute. I mean it. After we hung up, I looked out at the horizon again. The water was calm. But I knew storms could come out of nowhere on this coast. I'd seen it before. By afternoon, I found myself in Arthur's small study at the back of the house. The desk was neat, just as he'd left it. I opened the drawers, expecting old receipts and pens, but instead found a leather-bound journal. Inside were notes about his properties, expenses, and personal reflections. But near the end, there was a short paragraph written in his precise hand. If you're reading this, it means things have unfolded the way I feared. Trust Andrew. And trust yourself. Maggie. Do not let guilt undo your strength. I ran my fingers over the ink, feeling the tears rise before I could stop them. He had known me too well. He had known that guilt would be my weakness. That evening, I sat by the fire, wrapped in the same blanket, the journal on my lap. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and I felt the old ache of loneliness press against me. But this time, I didn't shrink from it. I let it sit beside me. I was no longer the woman they could manipulate, no longer the mother they could silence. Still, as the fire crackled and the waves crashed in the distance, one thought wouldn't leave me. If Laura had gone this far, she wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted, and sooner or later, she would find her way to my door. The knock came just after dusk, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the sound of the waves outside. I froze in the middle of the living room, my hands still holding the mug of tea I'd been about to sip. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. I set the cup down and moved quietly toward the door, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. My first thought was Andrew, maybe stopping by without warning. My second was much darker. I looked through the small side window and felt the air leave my lungs. Laura. She stood on the porch, her hair windswept, her coat pulled tight against the chill. A black SUV was parked at the end of the driveway. Engine still running, the silhouette of a man sat inside. Eric. For a brief second, I thought about pretending not to be home, but she lifted her eyes toward the window, and I knew she'd already seen me. There was no hiding now. I opened the door halfway, keeping the screen between us. What are you doing here? Laura. Her smile was tight, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. I had to find you. Mom. You scared me half to death. You can't just vanish like that. I'm fine, I said, my voice steady. I told you that. She took a small step closer, the porch light catching the tension in her face. You call that fine, running away from your home, from your family? I didn't run away. I left. There's a difference. Her jaw clenched. Eric got out of the car and joined her on the porch. He didn't look angry, just tired, worn down. Mom, he said, we just want to talk. About what? About the papers you tried to make me sign, about the doctor's appointment that wasn't really about my health. Laura blinked, caught off guard. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then, she recovered. You misunderstood. That was all to protect you. I opened the door a little wider. Protect me from what? My own life, my own mind. Her voice dropped lower, tight and sharp. From being taken advantage of. There are people who prey on women your age. Mom, you're trusting that lawyer too much. I let out a small laugh, one that surprised even me. That lawyer is the only person who hasn't lied to me lately. Her expression cracked for a second. Then, she softened her tone again. That careful sweetness she always used when she wanted something. Mom, I know you're angry, but we can fix this. Just come home. Let's start over. Home. I repeated quietly. You mean the house you were planning to sell once I was out of the way? Her face turned pale. Who told you that? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. She took a deep breath, her eyes darting toward Eric, who shifted uncomfortably. He looked at me like a man trapped in a fire he didn't start but didn't know how to escape. Laura straightened. The softness gone now. Fine. If you want to live out here alone, go ahead. But don't come crying to us when that lawyer of yours takes everything. I stepped forward and pushed the screen door open just enough to make her take a step back. You already tried to take everything. Laura. You just didn't expect me to stop you. Her lips trembled for a moment. And then she turned and walked down the steps toward the car. Eric hesitated, his eyes meeting mine. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be. Before all this, before greed hollowed him out. He looked like he wanted to say something. But Laura's sharp voice cut through the night. Eric. Let's go. He turned away and followed her. The car reversed down the drive, the headlights sweeping across the porch before disappearing into the dark. I closed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from fury, from relief, from everything that had been building inside me for months, finally breaking loose. That night, I called Andrew. They came. I said, both of them, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. They know where I am now." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Let me handle this. If they try anything again, I'll file for a restraining order." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you. Try to rest," he said softly. "You've done enough for one day." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My face looked different now. Harder. Older. Yes. But stronger too. I had faced her and didn't crumble. That mattered more than I could put into words. The next morning, the phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. A man's voice came through, calm and polite. "Mrs. Evans, this is Detective Harris with the Bar Harbor Police Department. Your daughter filed a concern report. She claims you might be in danger or suffering from confusion." I closed my eyes for a moment before responding. I already filed a voluntary statement 2 weeks ago. "Detective, I'm perfectly fine." "Yes, ma'am. We saw that on record. We just needed to follow up. Would you like me to mark this as resolved?" "Please do." He thanked me and hung up. I sat there for a long time afterward, the sound of the waves steady outside. Even now, she was still trying to control the story, still painting me as fragile, unstable. By noon, I decided to drive into town for fresh air. The roads were quiet, the trees glowing orange and red with early autumn. I stopped at a small cafe near the harbor and ordered a cup of clam chowder and coffee. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with silver streaks in her hair, smiled as she poured the cup. "You look like you needed a break," she said kindly. "Maybe I do." I said, "You're new around here." "Right. Just moved to the White House on Cliff Road." "Ah. Arthur's old place. I knew your brother a bit. He used to come in for coffee every Friday. Nice man. Always tipped well." I smiled faintly. "Yes. He was." After she left, I looked out the window at the water. A sailboat moved slowly across the bay, white against the deep blue. For a moment, I let myself imagine Arthur sitting across from me, smiling that patient smile of his. "You're doing it, Maggie. You're finally living for yourself." The thought made me laugh quietly. It felt strange to feel peace again, even if it was fragile. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Laura wasn't finished. She never was. When I returned home later that evening, I found an envelope taped to my front door. My name was written in Laura's handwriting. The wind tugged at the edges, but it stayed sealed. I stood there on the porch, the sound of the ocean roaring behind me, and stared at it for a long time before I finally reached out and pulled it free. I took the envelope inside and laid it on the kitchen table without opening it. The sight of her handwriting made my stomach twist. The loops of her letters were neat and controlled, the same way she used to write thank you notes when she was a girl. But there was something colder in it now, something sharp hiding behind the precision. I poured myself a glass of water and sat across from it, staring. It felt almost alive, like if I opened it, I'd be letting her voice crawl into my house again. I told myself I wouldn't do it, that I didn't owe her another second of my peace. But I already knew I would. The letter inside was written in her usual blue ink. 2 full pages. Mom, I don't know what you think is happening, but you've let people twist things. That lawyer is manipulating you. Eric and I only want what's best for you. You're making a mistake pushing us away. If this keeps going, we'll have to protect you from yourself. Please call me before this gets worse. There was no love at the end. No apology. Just her name. I folded the letter back up and placed it in my notebook with the others. Evidence. Her words. Her tone. All of it had become part of my record. That night, I called Andrew and read the letter to him. He listened quietly, then said, "She's laying groundwork for guardianship." My throat tightened. Guardianship. The word sounded like a sentence. He went on. "We'll need to act before she files anything. I've been speaking to Detective Collins in Portland. She specializes in elder financial abuse. She'll help us document everything." I took a deep breath. "All right. Tell me what I have to do." The next morning, I drove to the police station in town. Detective Collins was younger than I expected. Maybe in her 40s. Sharp-eyed with a calm confidence. She offered me a cup of coffee and sat across from me with a small recorder on the table. "Mrs. Evans, I know this isn't easy, but I need you to tell me everything. Starting from when you first suspected something was wrong." I told her everything. The overheard conversation. The forged documents. The false doctor's appointment. The missing money. When I finished, she nodded. "You did the right thing, leaving when you did. If you hadn't, your daughter could have taken full control of your assets within weeks." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Weeks. I had been that close to losing everything. Even my name. "We'll file your statement today," she said. "That way, if she tries to make another move, there's a record of intent. I'll also contact the Elder Services Unit to flag your case. You won't have to deal with this alone anymore." I thanked her, feeling both grateful and hollow. It was strange. Sitting there in a police station, talking about my own child as if she were a criminal. I had taught her to write her name, to cross her T's and dot her I's. Now I was asking strangers to protect me from her. Afterward, I stopped by the bakery next door and bought a coffee and a small blueberry muffin. It was something Arthur used to do after difficult days. A small reminder that life still had sweetness in it. When I got home, the sky had turned gray again. I went to the porch, unwrapped the muffin, and ate it slowly while watching the tide rise. The ocean had always made me feel small, but that day it felt like an ally. Steady and unshakable. That evening, Andrew called again. Detective Collins filed the report. He said, "Everything's documented. I've also submitted the property protection orders. From this point forward, all legal access to your estate is locked." I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you, Andrew." He hesitated before speaking again. "There's one more thing. Your daughter contacted my office today. She asked for copies of your financial records, claiming she was acting as your power of attorney." I felt my heart stop. I told her she has no authority, he said firmly. "But she's not backing down. She mentioned filing for guardianship within the week. Then it's a race," I said quietly. He didn't deny it. "We'll stay ahead of her, Mrs. Evans. I promise you that." After we hung up, I sat at the table with my journal open. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I wrote. Day 47. Laura knows where I am. She won't stop, but neither will I. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. A text from Caroline. "Saw your daughter in town this morning. Looked upset. Be careful. Maggie." I stared at the screen, unease curling in my chest. Bar Harbor wasn't a big place. If Laura was here, it meant she was getting desperate. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. My heart leapt. But it wasn't her. A young woman stood there, holding a small folder and smiling nervously. Mrs. Evans, I'm Harriet Dawson. I work with Andrew Harrison. He asked me to drop off some updated paperwork for you. I opened the door, relief washing over me. Of course. Come in. She stepped inside, glancing around the cozy living room. It's beautiful here, she said softly. Peaceful. I can see why your brother loved it. I smiled faintly. It feels like he's still here sometimes. Harriet nodded. Andrew wanted me to make sure you had copies of everything before we move forward. He also mentioned that Detective Collins may reach out again soon. I took the folder from her and set it on the table. Thank you. You're a godsend. She hesitated before leaving. Mrs. Evans, if you ever need help, please call me directly. Andrew trusts you completely. And so do I. After she left, I sat by the window flipping through the documents. Everything was clear, organized, airtight. For the first time, I believed we might actually win. That night, I allowed myself a glass of wine. I lit a candle, played one of Arthur's old records, and let the music fill the house. The ocean wind slipped through the cracks in the windows, carrying the smell of salt and pine. I thought of John, of Arthur, of every version of myself that had led to this one. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mom. Laura's voice whispered, barely audible over static. I know what you've done. You think you've beaten me. But this isn't over. I didn't say a word. I just listened to her breathe, then ended the call. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the glass. I looked at the dark ocean beyond the porch and whispered to the storm. Neither is it. Laura, neither is it. The days that followed were slow and heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I tried to pretend life was normal. I cooked, took walks along the beach, watered the plant by the window. But every sound made me jump. Every car that passed made me glance toward the road. I knew Laura was planning something. I just didn't know what. One morning, a letter arrived from the state court in Augusta. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was an official notice. Petition for guardianship, filed by Laura Evans King. My daughter had finally made her move. For a long time, I sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the paper. It felt surreal. Reading my own name printed in cold black letters beside the words incapable of managing affairs. I thought of the nights I'd stayed awake, worrying about her when she was sick as a child. The years I'd spent working extra hours to pay her tuition. Now she was telling the court I wasn't fit to live my own life. When I finally called Andrew, he wasn't surprised. I've been expecting this, he said calmly. We'll fight it. The good news is, you already have all the evidence. Your records. The police report. The statements from Detective Collins. It's all on your side. When will the hearing be? Friday, he said. Just 3 days from now. 3 days. I took a deep breath. All right. Let's finish this. The courthouse in Augusta was gray and solemn. The kind of building that made you feel small. On the morning of the hearing, I wore my navy dress and pearl earrings. The same ones John had given me for our 10th anniversary. When I looked in the mirror before leaving, I didn't see an old woman. I saw someone who had survived everything meant to break her. Andrew met me outside the courthouse steps. He gave a reassuring nod. Remember, you don't have to prove anything. Just tell the truth. Inside, the courtroom was nearly empty, except for a few clerks and the judge. Laura sat at the opposite table beside her attorney. A sleek man in a gray suit, Eric, was in the back row, his head bowed, avoiding my eyes. When Laura looked at me, there was no warmth left, Only exhaustion. Maybe bitterness. She thought this was the end of it. She had no idea it would be the end of her lie instead. The judge entered and the bailiff called the session to order. Laura's attorney spoke first, presenting her petition. He described me as vulnerable, confused, prone to poor decision-making. He claimed I had been manipulated by my late brother's attorney into making drastic financial changes. I sat perfectly still, letting him talk. Andrew had warned me that silence could be more powerful than anger. When he finished, the judge turned to Laura. Ms. Evans-King, do you have anything to add? Laura stood, her voice steady. My mother isn't herself anymore. She forgets things. She gets paranoid. She doesn't know who to trust. I just want to protect her. Protect me. The words made my throat tighten. Then Andrew rose. Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that Mrs. Iswell-Price Evans is fully capable, independent, and of sound mind. We have testimony from a licensed psychologist, Dr. Robert Trevino, who examined her last week. Dr. Trevino was sworn in and spoke clearly. Mrs. Evans shows no signs of cognitive impairment. She's alert, aware, and entirely competent to manage her own affairs. Andrew continued, presenting the documents Laura had forged, the recordings of her phone calls, and the financial report showing her debts totaling $85,000. The courtroom grew very quiet. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Evans-King, are these debts accurate? Laura hesitated, her face paling. Yes, but they have nothing to do with this. The judge looked unconvinced. Andrew then called Detective Collins, who confirmed that Laura had been under investigation for attempted financial coercion. Laura's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The truth was laid bare. When it was my turn to speak, my knees felt weak, but my voice was steady. I told the judge how I had overheard my daughter planning to take my home, how she had forged documents for power of attorney, how she'd tried to send me to a doctor to question my sanity. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Laura couldn't meet my eyes. The judge cleared her throat and looked directly at her. Ms. Evans-King, you've accused your mother of being incapable. Yet, the evidence suggests you've taken significant steps to seize her assets for your own benefit. That's not protection. That's exploitation. Laura's face crumpled. She tried to speak, but the judge held up a hand. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, effective immediately. Ms. Evans-King is prohibited from contacting Mrs. Evans or approaching her residence within 200 feet. My breath caught. It was over. Andrew placed a gentle hand on my shoulder as the judge adjourned the session. You did beautifully, he said. Laura gathered her things in silence, her lawyer whispering to her as they left. Eric lingered for a moment by the doorway, then looked back at me. His eyes were full of something like regret, but he said nothing and followed her out. Outside the courthouse, the sun had broken through the clouds. The air smelled clean, like rain on stone. I stood on the steps, letting the warmth hit my face. Andrew handed me the final papers. You're free now, he said simply. I nodded, unable to speak. Free. It was a small word for something so enormous. On the drive back to Bar Harbor, the trees flashed by in streaks of gold and green. I thought about all the years I had lived for everyone else. All the times I'd made myself smaller so Laura could feel bigger. I'd mistaken love for obedience. I'd mistaken silence for peace. When I reached the house, the ocean was calm, glittering in the late afternoon light. I stepped onto the porch and sat in the same chair where I had watched my brother's letters flutter in the wind weeks ago. The same wind moved through my hair now, but it no longer felt cold. I poured myself a glass of water and raised it slightly toward the horizon. For Arthur. For John. for the woman I used to be. The waves kept rolling in, steady and endless, carrying the last of the storm out to sea. The days after the hearing passed in a kind of quiet I had never known before. It wasn't the silence of fear or loneliness anymore. It was the silence that comes when the noise of chaos finally dies down. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think without the weight of someone else's voice telling me what to do. I woke early each morning and walked down the narrow path behind the house to the shoreline. The air was sharp and cool, the sky streaked with pale gold. I liked to walk barefoot where the waves met the sand, the cold water washing over my feet. The ocean had become my measure of peace. It didn't care who had won or lost. It simply kept moving. In the afternoons, I began to fix up the house. Arthur had kept it simple, but I added touches of my own. Fresh flowers on the table, new curtains in the living room, a small painting I found at a local art fair. It showed a single boat floating on calm water. The artist had named it after the storm. One evening, while watering the small garden I'd planted along the porch, I saw a flash of movement by the fence. At first I thought it was a shadow, but then a small gray cat stepped into the light. It was thin, with one torn ear, and it watched me with cautious curiosity. "Well, hello there," I said softly. The cat didn't move. I went inside, opened a can of tuna, and set it on the porch. By the next morning, the food was gone. The following day, the cat was back. I started calling him Peace. He never came close enough to touch, but he stayed nearby, a quiet little guardian of the yard. Around the second week, Caroline drove up from Portland to visit. She arrived with a trunk full of groceries and a smile that reached her eyes. When she saw me, she shook her head. "Maggie Evans," she said. "You look 10 years younger." I laughed. Maybe freedom is the best skincare. We sat on the porch drinking iced tea while the sea breeze tangled our hair. Caroline listened as I told her about the hearing. The judge. Laura's reaction. She shook her head slowly. "You did the right thing, Maggie. Some people never wake up to what's happening around them." "Maybe," I said quietly. "But it doesn't make it easier. She's still my daughter." Caroline reached across and squeezed my hand. "Loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you." After she left, I thought about those words for a long time. I had spent most of my life believing love meant sacrifice, that a good mother endures anything. But maybe love, real love, was sometimes the act of saying enough. A few days later, I received a call from Harriet Dawson, Andrew's assistant. Her voice was bright and warm. "Mrs. Evans, we're hosting a small community event in Bar Harbor next week. It's about elder rights and financial independence. Andrew thought you might like to come and share your experience." The idea made my stomach twist at first. I wasn't sure I wanted to stand in front of strangers and relive everything. But then I thought of all the women who might still be living in fear, the ones who hadn't found their voice yet. Maybe hearing my story would help them find it. I told Harriet I'd think about it. That night, as the sun dipped behind the water, I sat with a notebook in my lap, trying to write down what I might say if I did agree to speak. The words came slowly, haltingly at first. I wrote about trust and betrayal, about how easy it is to confuse love with obligation, about how silence gives power to the wrong people. When I finished, I felt lighter. I didn't know if the speech was any good, but it was honest. And that was enough. The next morning, I drove into town to pick up a few things. People had started to recognize me from the courthouse story that had made its way through the local paper. Some offered quiet nods of respect. Others, small smiles. It was strange, being seen again after feeling invisible for so long. At the bakery, the same waitress from before poured me a cup of coffee. "You're Mrs. Evans." "Right, I read about your case. You're brave. Most people would have given up." I smiled. Humbled. I almost did. When I got home, Peace was waiting by the porch steps, his tail flicking lazily. I sat beside him and watched the waves. For once, I didn't feel the need to plan or defend or anticipate. I simply existed. That evening, I received another call from Harriet. Andrew just wanted to remind you that the event starts at 5 on Friday. Will you be there? Yes, I said, before I could talk myself out of it. I'll be there. Friday came with clear skies and the faint scent of lilacs in the air. The event was held at the Bar Harbor Community Center, a small white building with windows that looked out onto the water. Inside, a group of about 20 people had gathered. Most were women around my age, though a few younger faces sat in the back. Listening quietly, Andrew introduced me. This is Mrs. Margaret Evans. She has a story about strength, about learning to reclaim her own life. When I stood, my hands trembled slightly, but my voice didn't. I told them about Arthur, about the inheritance, about the moment I realized my daughter's love had become a weapon. I told them about the fear, the loneliness, the sleepless nights, and finally, the freedom that came from fighting back. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before a woman near the front began to clap. Then others joined in. I felt my throat tighten. But this time, it wasn't from pain. It was something else. Afterward, Harriet came up to me, smiling. You were incredible, Mrs. Evans. You gave them something real. I thanked her and stepped outside. The evening light was soft and golden. I could hear gulls calling over the water, and the sound made me smile. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I was simply walking forward. When I got home that night, I stood on the porch, looking out at the horizon. Peace sat beside me, his tail brushing against my ankle. The tide was coming in. Slow and steady, I whispered into the wind, almost to myself. I made it. Arthur, you were right. I was stronger than I thought. The waves answered in their quiet rhythm, a language older than words. The morning after the event, I woke to the sound of gulls calling above the waves and the scent of salt drifting through the open window. The sunlight was soft and gold, spilling across the floorboards of my bedroom. For the first time in years, I didn't wake with dread. There was no rush of fear. No unfinished battle waiting for me. Just peace. Simple and quiet. I made coffee and carried it to the porch, sitting in the chair that had become mine. Peace. The cat stretched out at my feet, purring softly. The tide was low, revealing wet sand and smooth stones. I could see my reflection faintly in the water. An older woman with lines around her eyes and silver in her hair. But I didn't flinch from her. I liked her. She had earned every scar, every wrinkle, every quiet morning like this. A few hours later, the mail truck stopped by the gate. The driver waved and handed me a small envelope. The handwriting on the front made my heart stop for a moment. Laura's. I carried it inside and placed it on the table, staring at it while the clock ticked on the wall. I wasn't sure I wanted to open it, but curiosity, that stubborn human thing, finally won. Inside was a short note written in shaky handwriting. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I lost everything. The house, the job, Eric. I've been staying with a friend in Boston, trying to put my life back together. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I see now what I did to you, and I hate myself for it. I don't want money or anything from you. I just needed you to know I finally understand. Love. Laura. I sat for a long time with the letter in my hands. Part of me wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come. Instead, I felt something different. Not anger, not relief, just acceptance. When you've lived through betrayal, Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a slow letting go. Like the tide pulling back from the shore. You don't forget the storm. But you stop living inside it. I folded the letter neatly and walked outside. The sky had turned soft pink. The water glowing with evening light. I carried the letter to the edge of the porch, where the wind tugged gently at my hair. Then I lit a match, touched it to the corner of the paper, and watched the flames curl around her words. When it was nothing but ash, I let the wind carry it away. For a long moment, I stood there, the ocean stretching out in front of me. The sound of the waves was steady, eternal. I thought of Arthur, of his voice, telling me to trust myself. I thought of John and the years we'd shared. I thought of Laura, the little girl who used to run into my arms after school, and I hoped she would find her way back to the woman she might have been. I walked down to the beach and picked up a small, smooth stone, gray, with white streaks through it. I turned it over in my hand and smiled. It felt solid, real, unbreakable, like me. That evening, I sat by the fire with a glass of wine. The cat curled beside me, the record player humming softly in the background. I opened my notebook one last time and wrote the final entry. Day 100. I'm not afraid anymore. The house is mine. My life is mine. And my heart belongs to no one but me. I closed the book and set it aside. The firelight flickered across the walls, warm and steady. The storm that had ruled my life for so long was finally gone. Later, as the night deepened, I walked outside one last time before bed. The moon hung low over the water, bright and silver, and the waves shimmered in its light. I took the old set of keys from my pocket, the ones that had once opened the house in Portland, and looked at them for a moment. They felt heavy, but no longer mine to carry. I walked to the edge of the water, held them out, and let them fall. The keys sank into the dark tide with a soft splash, swallowed by the sea. When I turned back toward the house, I felt lighter. The past had been given back to the ocean, and I was free to begin again. I went inside, blew out the candles, and whispered into the quiet. Freedom doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it comes as a whisper, a breath, a single decision to stay standing when life tries to bend you. If someone out there is listening, if you've ever felt trapped, unheard, or afraid to start over, I want you to know something. It's never too late to take your life back. It's never too late to choose yourself. The wind rose outside, carrying the sound of the waves through the open window. I smiled, closed my eyes, and let it lull me to sleep.